Hi everyone, it's Margot. I hope you're doing well. As you can see in the title, today I'm back for an interview, and today's episode will be an interview with the director Neo Sora, who is behind the movie HappyEnd. That is a very acclaimed movie that have been traveling around the world in different festivals. I'm very happy that I could finally interview the director. I had so many questions after watching the movie. So during the interview, mainly we talked about his career and about his movie. I really loved HappyEnd, to be honest, and I had a very great time talking with the director. So I hope that you will like this interview as much as I did. As usual, if you like the interview, if you like the movie, don't forget to maybe like, subscribe, and comment. And also don't hesitate also to share this episode to a friend. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So without further ado, let's get started with the interview.
Hello.
Hi,
Hi, Margot. How are you?
I'm fine and you?
I'm okay. I just a little bit of a warning. There's a baby in the room, so there might be some crying at some point.
Okay. So I think we can directly get started with the introduction part. Can you maybe tell us more about you and introduce yourself for the one who just discovered you?
Sure. My name is Neo Sora, and I am the writer and director of Happy End. I was born and raised in New York in a Japanese household, and I always went back and forth between Japan and New York growing up. So between a couple of years in elementary school, I lived in Japan. Otherwise, I would go back to Japan every summer vacation, winter vacation, to see my grandparents and friends and spend time with them. But otherwise, I've just been yeah living in New York, and now 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago at this point, I moved back to Japan primarily to really kickstart the process of making Happy End.
Mhm. And maybe I'm a bit curious about why did you choose to work in the movie industry? Why being a director?
I always had many hobbies growing up. So I loved drawing. I loved making music, playing music, listening to music, and then, of course, watching movies as well. I also really enjoyed photography, but I was quite mediocre at all of them, I would say. I wasn't I was pretty good in maybe in my high school days, which was a very small high school, but once the fish in the pond discovers, the wider sea, you realize that there's just, people above you that are so much better. And so when I went to university, I realized that, I was not very good at any of them. Um, I was also taking a lot of classes in film at the time, and I realized that actually all of these hobbies I could use in filmmaking. And then also, over the course of watching a lot of films, I realized that I actually had quite a familiarity with a lot of these films. I was watching a lot of them growing up. And so when it came time to do film analysis, but also filmmaking myself, I realized that I just enjoyed the language of filmmaking. I enjoyed the process of it very much. And so I started to do that, but mainly in cinematography. I'm such a visual person
Mhm.
that I picked up the camera. I was quite good with the camera. And so I would shoot my friends theses films, and I would shoot my friends' projects. But I never expected that I would be a director, and especially not a writer. Then afterwards, after university, I would make my own projects here and there, and I would work with writers. But then I kind of began to realize that the stories that I actually really wanted to tell, of course, I would have these discussions with the writers about the large ideas and then, of course, in the details as well about the script that we would work with together. But then fundamentally, there was something about these stories written by other people that I didn't have at least the technique to really make it my own.
Mhm.
Um, and so um, I decided at a certain point that I also needed to write my films as well. And so the very first script that I decided I would sit down and write was turned into Happy End.
Mhm. And just before we go into our hand, do you have maybe one movie that inspired you a lot in your career? Or a movie that you really love?
Of course, it changes a lot. Only one is hard. I
Let's say the house is burning
let's
and
see.
you have to save one.
The house is burning. Okay, I have to say one DVD. Man, maybe it would be. So I love Edward Yang's films a lot, which I feel like is maybe obvious when you watch Happy End. And so sometimes I don't like to say the obvious answer, but in this case, maybe if I had to save one DVD from a burning building, it would be either Brighter Summer Day or maybe Terrorizers. Terrorizers was the first film that I really encountered Edward Yang with, and I was blown away completely.
Hmm.
And it's really beautiful. Um, I would say Terrorizers.
Okay. It's never an easy question, I know. Even I can answer that. I can't.
Yeah, no, it's too difficult.
Then maybe we can go to Happy End. I saw actually I heard about it for a very long time on social media, and I was following it for a very long time because I follow Anthony Chen. And I remember he promoted the movie extensively. So I was looking, I was getting interested. I was, oh, okay, I will note it down on the side. Then recently I could watch it. And I was like, okay, if I could talk to the director, it would be amazing so I can get to know more about this movie. But because actually I really, really like it. So I really want, I don't have a lot of time. So I will try to put it as short as possible. So maybe for the one who haven't watched the movie yet, can you quickly introduce the
Mhm.
movie? Keeping a bit of mystery still.
Sure, sure. So Happy End is yeah. So Happy End's a film about two best friends, Yuta and Ko. Yuta is a music, or I would say techno-loving teenager who likes to get in trouble, who's very mischievous. Ko also loves music, but he's a bit more serious. He is of Zainichi Korean background, and Yuta's Japanese background. And together they've been best friends forever, along with their small friend group that's composed of friends like Atachan, Ming, and Tomu. And the film kind of tracks the final year in their high school as certain things in their social political situation starts to change, and that affects their relationship. And so it's really a kind of a friendship breakup film.
Mm.
And all of this takes place in a near future Japan where a big earthquake is said to come at any moment.
Hmm. And I'm very curious to know what inspired you to do this movie.
So there are multiple threads, I think, as is the case with a lot of films, I think there are just all these different ideas floating around in your mind. And at first, maybe you're thinking of them as separate movies. But at a certain point, especially for the case of Happy End, there was one day in which all of them kind of came together in my mind as one film. And the various threads included ideas around friendship. So I'm quite fascinated by the relationship of the friendship, especially because just completely it's like impossible to define by the state, or it's impossible to define by paperwork or policy or all these things. It's just this kind of a relationship that can take any form. Some can be more important than your family, whereas others can be as shallow and um, as someone that you just meet at a bar. But those interactions could lead to something even quite deep as well. Um, so I was thinking about this notion of friendship, and that was beginning to converge with these feelings that I was having around my own experience of my political consciousness awakening during my years in university and also after university, where um, I was expecting that given the same information of, let's say, evidence of like structural racism or xenophobia or, violence being enacted on a population or even genocide, all these things, I expected that the people who I considered my friends would react very similarly to those kinds of things as I did, and I think that's probably also the case of other people who expected the same from me. and didn't necessarily get the reaction that I wanted or they wanted. And especially when the relationship is stronger and deeper, the moments of these betrayals in a way can be even more explosive or hurtful. And I've had these experiences where the closer I was, the more hurt I was as well by the reaction or non-reaction of my friends. And so this was a feeling that I was really, I felt very strongly. And also there was something also unchangeable about it, because a lot of the discussions that me and my friends were having were really around identity and identity politics, which to me seemed something like an unchangeable fact about our being. And so, while at the same time I understood why certain of my friends had to keep a distance from me or make distance from me, and also why I had to make distance from certain friends, there was also a sadness that came with that, because the way that we were talking, it made it seem like everything was so unchangeable about who we are, or only changeable by like commitments, like very active political commitment that people not weren't necessarily willing to engage in. So those were strong feelings I was having, and then at the same time, I was really thinking about the history of Japan and the history of Japanese colonialism as it happened, as it manifested in different parts of Japanese history. Mm-hmm. So how it manifested in 1923 during the Great Kanto earthquake, in which the earthquake sparked this massacre of Zainichi Koreans in Tokyo. And then in about 2014, when I was spending time in Japan, there were these racist marches that were being held in these Korean and Chinese neighborhoods. And today, now that same racism is being directed against all sorts of different people in the form of like intense xenophobia and racism. Mm-hmm. And then so my mind then naturally goes to, okay, so then if these are unchecked and if these are arriving at their logical conclusions, what would it be like when in the future, where it's said to have a big earthquake is about to strike Japan or Tokyo at any moment, like what would happen in this near future when the earthquake is just about to come? And so that sort of anchored all of these things into one cohesive idea.
Mm-hmm. Several things, because it's very interesting. I don't know where to start, but one thing I really was surprised and appreciate in the movie is the fact that you talked about the Zainichi. I realized this recent years that this theme is more and more present in movies. There was another movie recently in Japan that was A Man, also that talks about Zainichis.
Yeah.
And it's a part of history that if you don't know about Korea and Japan, maybe you ignore. And it's a very, very, very important, and to understand also political tension between those two countries, and also China, if you want to add it, you have to understand the history, what happened in the past, because this is continuing right now. The problem that we have right now, they originated from the past. And I really appreciated that you talked about the Zainichi and everything that goes around it. The fact that his family and his grandparents were, maybe, we don't know, but they were forced to go to Japan. And they decided to stay because if they go back to Korea, they will be considered as traitor. And they tried to stay in Japan, but for Japanese, they are not Japanese. Even if he's been there maybe for 3 generations and he lived there, was born there, he speaks Japanese, he has a Japanese name, but he will still be a Korean. Especially for older generations, yeah. Especially. I feel in Japan, maybe younger generation are more open, but for older generation, I saw a lot of different documentaries, and a lot of older generation, they're still, not all of them, but certain, they are still in this type of way of thinking. And it's a real problem. Mm-hmm. And I found it very, 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 very interesting that you decided to talk about Zainichis, because I think in the West, we don't know about it a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, thank you for, I mean, you're clearly quite knowledgeable about this history, but I think, and perhaps even more so than a lot of Japanese people, because I think there's a big, and perhaps this is leading to why more films and filmmakers are trying to grapple with this theme or topic, is because there's a growing historical amnesia, forgetting
Mm-hmm.
of this history, and which I think is quite intentional and purposeful on the side of a lot of these historical revisionists who are intentionally trying to rewrite Japanese
Yes.
textbooks,
Mm.
rewriting or at least destroying these statues or memorials in memory of these Zainichi Koreans that were either killed or massacred or used for labor or all these things. And it truly feels like a reflection of, um, or at least a reflection of the desire for Japan to return to its
Mm-hmm.
imperial past. And that desire is clearly a lack of, um, or maybe it is a awareness, but you know, it's a lack of coming to terms with the types of atrocities that Japan committed on all these countries as an imperial country, in China or Manchuria, Taiwan, Korea, and a lot of countries in Southeast
Mm-hmm.
Asia, including Indonesia and others. And so, um, so I suppose part of the reason why I was interested in that is because I wanted to resist that kind of historical amnesia myself. I just wanted to learn more about what Japan had done in
Mm-hmm.
the past. And yeah, the more you learn about it, the more you encounter this history of horrible dehumanization that Japan enacted onto these other peoples. And that kind of structural dehumanization continues today in various
Mm-hmm.
forms. And so once you develop this kind of lens of analyzing history and society through this colonial lens, or this lens of colonialism, then suddenly so many things become clear, like the difference between citizenship, the idea of naturalization, the idea of even the identity of Japanese and foreigner, the establishment of these detention centers, like all these things are quite the remnants or echoes of colonialism. And so, uh, yeah, no, I think it's a quite an important topic to talk about, especially because there are a growing number of people in power who are trying to not talk about
Yeah, and especially I think I'm not very aware of what's happening, but I saw that in Japan right now there is a new. It's a woman this time.
who is this woman, Sanaya Takaichi, who's like an ultra
Yeah.
right, ultra historical revisionist. Like it's quite a bad
Hmm.
situation
But
right now.
also, I think this movie, because this movie you said it's if we continue this way, how would it go? So it's a bit like a a close future, not that much of a future, but more like maybe a tomorrow or next year. And
Yeah,
actually, it's very up to date because you talk about Japan, but in France, in Europe, in the US, we have the you can see that the same thing is happening everywhere. There is like a rise of extreme right coming up pretty much everywhere.
yeah,
Pretty much, let's be honest. So it's a tendency and trend that
yeah.
is coming up from all over the world. So I think this movie is very up to date right now. And also, you said you wanted to achieve this through the story mainly, but also I wanted just to talk about the visual because the story is mainly about a future that could happen. So sometimes I felt like, especially with the visual, a bit of a dystopian type of energy. What could happen
Yeah.
wrong? And apart from the story, also with the visual, the school, for example, how you chose the school and the buildings and everything gave me also this type of energy. So just apart from the story, I also wanted to know for the visual aspect, how did you decide to implement this?
Yeah, the dystopian feeling that I think we are all feeling very acutely throughout the world is something that I certainly have been feeling for a while as well. And that is something I wanted to incorporate into the movie. And and for that, in the case of Happy End and in the case of Japan, we were trying to um, present a landscape of these buildings that are, I guess, just like growing more brittle and kind of um, they're very functional, but they were functional of like the 80s or 70s when they were
Mhm.
built, and due to the decline of the economy, they're kind of not maintained and starting to rust, and so that's the kind of feeling that I was trying to evoke with the film, and the shot scales, the wide shots, the decision to try to frame these characters in these like really wide frames. Came mainly because I was equally interested in the world in which the characters inhabit and the story of that world happening simultaneously with the story of this like intimate um, relationship happening between Yuta and Ko, and so trying to show both at the same time. With the sense that like the structures and buildings that are standing behind them can come crumbling down at any
Mhm.
moment. And so that's the sense that I was trying to build. The thing that I feel like plays on a really subconscious level is that uh, we were intentionally trying to not show sky,
Mhm.
and when we do show sky, it's used in a very specific
Mhm.
moments in order to like release some pressure or something like this. But otherwise, like you see the full frame filled with structures and
Mhm.
buildings, and I think that also creates this like oppressive and heavy
Yes.
feeling that you see in the film.
And I wanted to know a bit more about if you had anything during the movie or part of the movie that was difficult to shoot or to create. Anything that was challenging for you during the movie.
Yeah, there were many things that were challenging, but I think the obvious thing was the car. Um, it, we all knew that we couldn't use CGI. We had to just put the budget towards getting a car
Mhm.
and standing it up in real life. There's something about that that we were all very committed to very early on. And so, but like, in order to send a car, you actually need to have a location that would allow you to do that, and safety protocols, and it just costs a lot of money as well. And so all these things kind of went into it. Um, but in the end of the film, you only see it for like 3 shots or
Mhm.
something, which is like maybe I should have put in more. But um, so that was difficult. It's not the most obvious scene, but actually a really difficult scene to shoot was the scene where Ko and his mother are walking at night through this shopping
Mhm.
alley in the darkness. We just getting this shot was so difficult for some reason. We just had a lot of malfunction of the equipment, but everything just wasn't working that well, and people were starting to get annoyed because it was so late at night,
Mm.
and all of these things contributed to just making for such difficulty. And then otherwise, there were certain scenes that just had a lot of people in it, and so organizing the people in the frame, having everybody do exactly what they needed to do was also quite difficult. Um, but all in all, to be honest, the shooting process was quite amazing and fun, and such an enjoyable experience.
Mhm. And how many days of filming or months of filming did you need it?
It was 30 days,
30
around
days.
30 days.
It seems fast.
Yeah, I think fast for relative to like Hollywood or France, maybe, but in Japan, it's actually quite a long time. A lot of, especially independent films, shoot things very quickly. 2 weeks or
Okay.
3 weeks or something. Yeah, and we also had a lot of time to rehearse and workshop with actors before, which usually not a lot of Japanese independent films have the luxury to do.
So you had workshop.
Yeah, yeah.
And was it hard to get authorization in Japan? Because I guess you needed sometimes certain authorization to maybe gather a big number of people or the car. So I guess it was also a part of the time that you used during the shooting.
Yes, but also very quickly we realized that Tokyo was going to be difficult to shoot because originally we wanted to shoot in Tokyo, mainly at these sites where the Great Kanto earthquake happened. So that would be kind of the east side of Tokyo, generally, where the damage was done the most. And we were originally looking at a lot of locations in this area, but actually Tokyo is notoriously very difficult to shoot in. They really don't like when film shoots take the streets and these kinds of things. And so we were looking for other cities and places to shoot. And then quickly, Kobe came up as a very friendly city to filmmaking. The Kobe Film Commission, so the kind of department that helps films get made in the city, is extremely lovely and very helpful. And they really, we all worked together really hard to try to make the film happen. They really cared about the film as well. And so, actually, once we decided to move the shooting to Kobe, a lot of things became much easier. And we also found the school and we found all the locations that you see in the film. So basically 90% of the films in Kobe, except for maybe a couple of scenes in Osaka.
Okay, very interesting. And do you have any fun fact maybe that the people watching the movie might not know?
So the main five actors, four of the actors have never acted before. The kid who plays Atachan is the only person who's a professional actor. They all met for the first time on the film, but quickly they became very good friends. Um, to the point that the main two actors who play Yuta and Ko after the film became roommates. So they are actually best friends now. They actually became roommates, and they both became actors. And so the process of the film, in a way, was a process of them also becoming best friends. And I feel like there's something about the truth of their friendship that made its way into the screen.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the other thing I would say is the DJ who appears in the very opening of the film is DJ Yosuke Yukimatsu, who's actually a real DJ, and in my mind is one of the best DJs in the world.
Okay, that's a fun fact that maybe a lot of people might not catch. Good, thank you.
Yeah.
And what do you hope the audience will get from Happy End for the one word? Who haven't watched maybe the movie yet, what do you hope they will get from it?
You know, I like I feel like the movie is belongs to the audience in a way, and so it's really whatever the audience wants to take away from the film. But something that I really was thinking a lot about while making the film was the feeling of once the film ends, thinking about a really close friend of yours that you maybe haven't talked to in a long time and maybe trying to reconnect with them, wanting to pick up the phone and call a good friend that you haven't talked to in a long time. And I think, just very nostalgic about all the friends that I hadn't talked to in a long time, while writing this film. And that feeling I tried to keep really dear in the film. And so I was hoping that the audience would get a little bit of this out of it.
Hmm. Okay. Do you want to add anything about the part about Happy End, or do you want to go to the last part, the future projects?
We can go to the next part.
Okay. So, just maybe for the future project, is there a genre that you would like to explore?
Yeah, I guess like the older I get, or the more I think about movies, the more I'm drawn to comedy.
Okay.
I really like humor and comedy and the effect that it has on people. I was kind of revisiting Buster Keaton a little bit, and then um, I haven't had the time to do this quite yet, but I really want to watch and rewatch a lot of Ernst Lubitsch's films, and then of course, people like Jacques Tati. I love Elias Suleiman, this Palestinian filmmaker. I am really drawn to these kinds of filmmakers who make comedy in the wide shot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so into that, and I'd love to try to do that a little bit in future projects.
Mm. And either for the one we're listening to us right now, do you have like any director that you would like to recommend from Japan or another country? Or a movie? It can be both.
Actually, maybe, yeah, I think I would say Elias Suleiman, who I just mentioned. He's a Palestinian filmmaker who makes comedies. His films are funny, and yet they still somehow are able to capture this reality that, I mean, this really is the struggle that Palestinians are facing, but with this lightness and attention to humanity, and but also like using this kind of lightness as just an example of like resilience of his people.
Hmm.
Um, and there's something about his films that really brought me back into loving cinema again, because there was a one point at which I was beginning to lose that. And so, yeah, Elias Suleiman, everyone should watch his films. They're all amazing.
Okay. And just to wrap up, do you have any final words for the listeners right now?
Well, the film Happy End is playing in, I hope it's playing in France still. So if you're listening to this, I hope you get a chance to see it. And if you are moved to call an old friend of yours, I would suggest doing that because they probably would want to hear from you, actually. And that is the feeling with which I made the film.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting the invitation and thank you for this interview.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on.